Hello once again and welcome back to your top 10 countdowns. I'm your host Tereza and today's topic will be the top 10 disturbing things that Roman gladiators went through. Let's get started. Now obviously we've all seen movies like 300, Gladiator, and Spartacus, but who were the gladiators and what were their rules? Well, number 10 in our countdown, you were probably property. Gladiators were war prisoners, arrested criminals, or slaves of wealthy upperclassmen who had been sold in Rome's lucrative slave market. When the Monera, gladiator battles, first began, it was only slaves or criminals fighting against one another for a full year. No one actually died in gladiator battles under the law of Emperor Nero. However, we know from media that that didn't last, and gladiator battles became a widespread and gory form of entertainment. However, a common misconception is that gladiators always fought to the death. In reality, as time went on and the Monera games became a lot more controlled of a spectacle that raked in a lot of cash, the wealthy cultivated gladiators and trained them. They invested in them, so it would be an economic blow to have their warriors die. So gladiator games, while bloody, had more of the intent to maim rather than downright slaughter. However, you always did as you were told, so sometimes the hand was forced. At a time when 3 in every 5 persons did not survive until their 20th birthday, the odds of a professional gladiator being killed even accidentally during the 1st century AD was perhaps 1 in 10. With this evolution and growing celebrity of gladiators came free men volunteering to be gladiators. They signed on for a fee and swore a fearful oath of absolute submission to the lentista, to be burned, flogged, beaten, or killed if so ordered. In fact, it was estimated that more than 20% of the trainee gladiators who attended the Ludi Gladiatori, or Gladiator School, were free men from Roman society and also composed most of the gladiator population by the end of the Roman Republic. But no matter how idolized a gladiator became in Roman society, he never rose above the social status of a prostitute. Number 9 in our countdown is the contradictory sexualization. Gladiators had their names painted on street walls, monuments erected, and even properties built in their names and images. So isn't it a little strange that despite all of this, the second a gladiator was out of the ring, Roman people would look down upon him? Well, since they were usually criminals or slaves, this was the case. The term gladiator was even used derogatorily at the time. That didn't stop their wealthy masters from taking advantage of the endless lust directed towards the men. Gladiators had such an effect on women that the first term for fangirl was invented in this time. Graffiti was found on the walls of Pompeii even note how one gladiator was the delight of all the girls, while another catches the girls at night in his net. The whole industry was built around sexual attractiveness of gladiators, and gladiator merchandise was popular as a result, especially amongst Roman women. For example, flakes of gladiator skin, bottles of their sweat, and ornaments colored with their blood were sold as aphrodisiacs, contraceptives, and love potions. Men, however, sought out the fighter's blood because it was believed to increase a man's sexual vigor. Speaking of blood, could you use a little to your own advantage? Before you think about it, you can't fake death comes in at number 8. It'd probably be pretty tempting when faced with clubs, roaring lions, flaming arrows, and swinging swords. You get hit hard enough and a messy gash with enough blood can make your prone body look lifeless if you lay still enough. But don't be fooled. When they drag your body out from the arena and your heart skips a beat thinking you got away easy, you've done anything but. The Romans had measures to make sure that the dead were truly dead and not faking it. After a gladiator faced his honorable death and was carried through the death gate, he was taken to a room where he was stripped of his armor before they cut his throat. Nothing to worry about if you were dead, but if any part of you was still alive, it would be bleeding out. When a less than honorable gladiator was declared dead, a slave would instead come out and bash his head in with either a large rock or a club publicly. Either way, there was no way for a gladiator to escape death after he had fallen. The Romans loved their irony, and what better example than deaths at a funeral? Number 7 in our countdown. How did these bloody displays even begin? Well, they were originally part of the funeral entertainment and blood rites for wealthy nobles. When distinguished aristocrats died, their families would have 2 slaves or criminals throw down in a kind of macabre eulogy to honor the virtues the deceased had had. Okay, 2 Roman writers, Tertullian and Festus, give us some insight as to why this may be. Romans believed fresh human blood helped purify the deceased of sin. Under the reign of Julius Caesar, these games flourished. He threw 100-man spectacles in honor of his deceased daughter and father, and by the end of the 1st century BC, government officials began hosting state-funded games as a way of currying favor with the masses. One notable exhibition took place in 216 BCE, when 22 fights were held over 3 days to mark the death of a prominent senator. In Gladiator School, these men are taught strategy, technique, stamina, and how to die, which is number 6 in our countdown. It was in the ludus that the gladiators learned the rules of the arena. Above all that they were taught was that they were entertainers first and killers second. But all gladiators were instructed to accept the will of their editor, the efficient. So, if the editor decreed that the gladiator be killed, they were expected to accept this by kneeling and showing their throat to their opponent to be cut. Despite their status and social standing, gladiators were expected to be noble and honorable in death. If you did indeed die well, then you would be treated with extra dignity. Your body would be removed from the arena with respect, as we discussed in number 8. So what makes a gladiator death inhonorable? First, the gladiator would have had to cry out during the fight, which is considered a sign of weakness. Should a gladiator be losing and ask for mercy from the editor and be denied, he was considered a coward who had failed to commit his life to the games. And so what do you feed a mighty warrior? Well, seeing as he was also your property, you want to get your bang for your buck. Number 5 is the warrior diet. When the remains of 67 gladiators, predicted to be over 2,000 years old, were researched, modern-day science allowed for a reconstruction of what these mighty men were eating. It was discovered that they ate a plant-based, carb-rich diet that included barley and beans, but very little animal protein. Essentially, they were vegetarians. For how hard these men were worked and trained, this diet was not meant to be filling, more pragmatic reasons, as simple carbs can boost subcutaneous fat and increase survival in battle. Because of this fatty cushioning, the blood vessels and nerves were better protected when they were cut in fights, as blood clots significantly faster. Another reason for this diet was that it was cheap when you had a lot of mouths to feed. Oftentimes food was already something gladiators had held over their heads as a motivational drive. Gladiators also consumed some more other questionable things, such as each other's blood, or drinking cupfuls of water mixed with ash as the perfect remedy for abdominal cramps and bruises. I guess if they're hangry, they're gonna be more efficient in the arena. Gladiators weren't the only hungry animals in the arena, however. Number 4 in our countdown is Battle of Beasts. Animals were seen in the arena for the purpose of killing or being killed. It's said around 1 million animals died in a sport called venatio over the 390 years that the Roman amphitheater was active. Venatio was hunting and killing of wild animals and would often take place in the morning ahead of a gladiator's battle that would be happening in the afternoon. Animals used in the games were considered to be extremely exotic at the time as a display of wealth of the empire. Some of these examples are deer, rabbits, crocodiles, and elephants, and then the better known examples of leopards, bears, tigers, boars, and lions. While the goal of venatio was for the animals to be the victim of the trained gladiator referred to as a venator, sometimes they simply overpowered their opponent and won in the arena, in which case, like a gladiator, the crowd would celebrate the animal's glory. Animals were also used in ad bestias, a form of execution for lower class. A prisoner or multiple would be let loose in the arena with wild animals for the crowd's delight. Sometimes traps or weapons were laid out to draw out the spectacle. Even after Emperor Constantine outlawed gladiatorial fights in the year 325, gory animal entertainment continued for another 300 years. Don't be misguided, however, the Romans knew how to have a bloodbath just about anywhere, so Rock the Boat is number 3 in our countdown. Called Nautria, this event was a naval battle staged by the emperors using real ships in large Roman channels or even artificial lakes. Considered the most spectacular of blood sport, this wasn't like regular gladiatory battles taking place regularly. This was reserved for high honors or special occasions. The Roman Colosseum is known to have held 2 near the date of its inauguration. One Naumachia took place in the commemoration of Julius Caesar's triumph in 46 BC. No surprise, as Julius was actually the inventor of this blood sport. Participants were low-status gladiators, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to death, rather than any appreciated gladiators, as the battles were much bloodier and fatality being the goal made death inescapable. And that's not what the gladiators were about, so it was said as many as 2,000 prisoners would be boarded onto the ships to fight amongst each other while civilians watched from a safe distance. And boy, did civilians come. People came from all around to see, and it's recorded that some were trampled to death in the process. Others camped out overnight in order to get a seat, like it was an Ed Sheeran concert. Like festivals or fireworks, a mini industry would set up around the Laker Amphitheater. Bars, street vendors, and prostitutes would come into the area in order to capitalize on these events. Unlike a letter from Hogwarts, this is not the type of school you're excited to attend. Number 2 is Gladiator School. You only got into this school one of 2 ways: slave purchase or volunteering, which by the way would be insane, as gladiator schools were incredibly strict and the training they provided was harsh, with some archaeological evidence showing that gladiators could be killed as punishment punishment for just misbehaviors. This is because upon entering Gladiator School, those who had not been condemned to it as a punishment for a crime sign a contract stipulating the type of combatant that they would become, how many times a year they would fight, and sign themselves over into the property of their master. Seeing as there was different kinds of gladiators, men were sorted into categories based on height and body, where they would train under a madristi, or a gladiator trainer, who were former gladiators themselves and would pass on the skills they learned in the arena to the new generation of fighters. As we know, food was sparse and purely fueled. The rest of the environment reflects that ideal, with gladiators living in cells and only leaving them to train or battle. If there were any luxuries in gladiators training schools, they were only there to protect the slave owners' investments in their gladiators. Archaeologists have found many schools equipped with heated floors and reliable hot water, as well as infirmaries and graveyards. After the rebellion of Spartacus and his fellow gladiators around 73 BC, these schools were no longer privately owned, and the state took a much closer interest in how they were run, ensuring that gladiators they trained wouldn't use their specialist fighting skills against Rome itself again. Finally, at number 1 in our countdown, the break for freedom. You've been kept in a dirty cell, forced to battle and train on repeat, fed mushy barley, something's gotta give. How do you get out? We know you can't exactly fake your death. Well, unfortunately, unless he performed exceptionally well in the arena, a gladiator was unlikely to be made a free man after just one glory. It's reported that most gladiators needed to fight and win about 15 times before seeing freedom from slavery. Since a sole gladiator fought an average of 3 to 6 times a year, this was a long time. And since 1/5 of all fights ended in one of the combatants dying, the odds of making it to freedom were pretty low. However, some gladiators had no interest in leaving. One example is celebrated fighter Flama, who rejected his offered freedom on 4 separate occasions. He carried on and in total fought an amazing 34 times, winning 21 of his contests and drawing in 9 of them before dying in an arena in Sicily. One of Rome's most famous gladiator battles documented was a tiebreaker. Priscus and Versus were 2 of the best gladiators of the 1st century, so obviously they had them face off. A poet named Martial documented both men being a perfect match of skill and bravery, fighting for hours until ironically submitting to one another at the same time. The crowd exploded at the scene, and shocked Emperor Titus declared that they had both won and gave them the ultimate prize: freedom, symbolized by a rudis, a wooden sword that both men would have used when they started their gladiator training. These examples were lucky and skilled men, however, as most gladiators did not ever survive to see freedom, especially those who earned their career as a punishment for being a criminal. Simply put, the most disturbing part of being a Roman gladiator is you never truly got to stop. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. We'll be back soon with some more of the top 10 countdowns for you guys. Until then, comment down below what your favorite gladiator movie is.